I met the man who counts stars on the journey from Rostock to Stralsund, on a train traveling over flat land across the Mecklenburg-Vorpommern plain. So flat, like an open hand. So open that the sky, the great wide North German sky, commanded all the attention, left no distraction, no hills, no forests, just sky and earth. He sat beside me without me quite noticing it. That's how it sometimes is, the way people board, unnoticeably, silently, without you really seeing them, without your mind registering them, until suddenly you notice they're there, so alive beside you, so present, and you realize, with astonishment, that they've been there a long time, perhaps since the beginning of this journey, since Rostock maybe, since the first hour. His notebook was what I noticed first. Large, thick, old, very old, with a brown leather cover, the leather worn, handled, cared for, with pages slightly wavy, bent almost, as though the notebook carried too much knowledge, too much life, too much observation, too many nights, too many numbers, too many stars. "I count," he said, without waiting for my question, without me asking one. I hadn't asked anything, but he answered anyway, as though he'd given this speech 100 times, 1,000 times, as though the speech lived in him, as though it were his life. "I count the stars, every night, for exactly 44 years now. 44 years. Every night that's not cloudy, every night with clear sky, and there aren't so many clear nights here in the north. I count." I asked him, "How can you count stars? There are too many. Millions, billions perhaps, almost infinite." And he looked at me with old, wise eyes, pale blue, attentive, as though I'd misunderstood the simplest question, as though I were a child who couldn't grasp the logic. "You don't count all of them," he said patiently, with infinite patience, with the patience of 44 years of counting, 44 years of observation. "You choose a quadrant in the sky, always the same one, the same point you can see from where you live, and you count how many stars are in it on that evening, under those conditions, in that moonlight, at that temperature. And the next evening you count again, the same quadrant, the same place in the sky, as though comparing a picture. And you see whether there are more or fewer, whether something has changed, whether new stars are there, or old stars have disappeared." He opened his notebook carefully, as though opening a sacred book, as though the pages were the Bible, with reverence, with respect. And it was full of numbers, full of observations, page after page, neatly arranged, carefully written, dates beside them, conditions noted, moon phase, temperature, visibility. 1959, I read. 12 stars. 14th September, clear. Moonrise 23:15. Temperature, mild. And then, 15th September, 10 stars. Moonlight, brightness, fewer stars because of the moon. And then, 16th September, 13 stars, very clear. Temperature, cold. Everything more distinct. Decades written down in fine script, in this clean, old hand, in this trembling, precise hand. 44 years of observations, of counting, of attention, of love of the night, of life. "What has changed?" I asked. "Light pollution," he said immediately, like a well-learned answer. "Lights from cities, more and more lights, bigger and bigger lights. And the atmosphere, not much, but a bit. And sometimes the eyes themselves change. I wear glasses now, strong glasses, and it's different to count with glasses than without. The colors are different, the sharpness is different. I have to account for that in my notes." He turned the notebook around, leafed back. "But you see, the stars haven't become fewer. That's what's interesting. What's interesting is that they haven't become fewer, even though everything speaks against it." "Why do you do this?" I asked, and it was a genuine question, a question out of genuine confusion, genuine curiosity. I didn't understand the craft, the patience, the years, the nights, the dedication. "Because," he said, and his voice became softer, older, as though speaking into the past. "Every night is different. Every night is new, though it's the same place in the sky, though I choose the same point. The stars never move, but the night is always different. The atmosphere is different. The quality of light is different. And I'm different. And when I count, I'm involved, I'm part of it, I'm entangled, I'm present. I'm not just a man who takes a train and has a house and pays bills and time mixes and passes. I'm a man who knows the stars. Those 10 or 14 or 15 stars in my quadrant, I know them all, personally, almost by name. Each has a personality. For 44 years I know them, I've observed them. And I know which ones are new stars I didn't see before, and which ones perhaps, well, not gone, not disappeared, but changed, brighter or darker, older or more weary. The train was now in flat land as far as the eye could see. There was no distraction, no hills, just earth and sky. And the sky opened above us like a giant hand, almost God's hand, almighty, infinite, vast. And in the hand were the stars, few because of the moonlight, because of the bright, glowing moon, but there were some, perhaps 10 or 15 in the place where I was looking, in my quadrant of ignorance, in my field of the unknown. "When we arrive in Stralsund," he said, and his eyes were already elsewhere, already on the stars, already at his task, "I will count, with my glasses, with my thick old notebook. And then I write it all down, everything. The number, the conditions, the temperature, the moon. And tomorrow night I'll count from a different place, from a different spot. Because I travel, you see. I'm constantly on the move. I go from city to city, from country to country, from place to place. And I count everywhere, everywhere I am. And that's interesting, very interesting. Because the stars change when you see them from different places. Because the atmosphere is different. Because the human is different. Because the soul is different." We sat in the dark and said not much more. Not much more. The man with his notebook was already counting, motionless, concentrated, absolutely still, almost in a trance. His fingers went over the page, noting, writing, whilst his eyes went to the sky, up, searching, finding, counting. 1, 2, 3. And I realized this wasn't madness. This wasn't obsession. wasn't a psychological disorder, wasn't neurosis. This was a way of living. This was a philosophy. This was a way of saying, I see the world. I really see it, every day, every night. I count it. I measure it. I observe it. So I am with it. So I am connected. So I'm not alone. So I count. And now, as we travel, as the train carries me on, and the night grows older, grows deeper, grows heavier, grows riper, and the stars become less visible, disappear behind clouds, behind moonlight, behind the horizon, behind time. I think of this man, of these 44 years of counting, of this routine that's not a routine, because every night is new, every night different, every night a surprise, every night a new adventure, a new chance. Of this way of living, with attention, with full presence, with patience, with a kind of spiritual love of the world, of the universe. My eyes grow heavy, grow tired, but I try still to count in this moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the numbers disappear, become dream, and only the stars remain. Few, but there, shining, bright, faithful, constant, imperishable. And the night, dark and vast and endless and wonderful. And the gentle rhythm of the train that carries me, ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. A heartbeat that calms me, that lulls me to sleep. I met the midwife between Schwerin and Güstrow in the early hour when the night is still grey, dark grey, a grey like damp stone, and the world hasn't decided whether it wants to wake up, whether it's worth the effort, all the struggle, the costs, all the hopes that might be disappointed again. She sat with a bundle on her lap. Not a baby, no, not a new human life that emerged pink and crying into the world, but cleaning cloths, bandages, instruments, the tools of her trade, the instruments of her knowledge, the things she'd used in 1,000, 2,000 births, in 50 years of work, every day, every night. But her eyes were so far away, so distant from the present moment, so absent, that I immediately knew she'd just come from a birth, that she was still there somehow, with that woman, in that moment, in that room, in that struggle and that hope and that fear. I'm coming from the village of Lübeck, she said, though I hadn't asked, as though giving a speech, a daily speech, a speech she'd already given 1,000 times and would give 1,000 times more. A girl, 4 kilograms, 2 in the morning. A difficult birth, long hours, but the child is healthy, the mother lives. That's all that matters. The mother sits in her bed now. She'll sit in that bed for weeks, weeks of pain and healing, and watches the child, amazed, still amazed, perhaps weeping, weeping with gratitude, weeping with fear that she might damage it. And I'm on my way to the next, to Güstrow, an old woman in her 10th month, so well past her time, so already in danger, but still hoping. It's always like this. Here a baby, there a baby, babies everywhere. The world is full of babies, everywhere. And me in between, on this train, between the times, between the lives, blood still under my fingernails, though I've washed them 3 times, thoroughly, carefully, carefully. She was how old? 70? 75? Perhaps older? 80? That was hard to say, because fatigue sat in her like something chronic, like a habit, something she'd carried for decades, that it had become part of her bones, part of her DNA almost, part of her soul. Her skin was wrinkled but firm. Her eyes were blue but deep, deep like old wells. "I've been doing this for 46 years, she said slowly, quietly, and it was pride and weariness at once. It was sorrow and grace at once. Since 1950 almost. Before the war, during the war, after the war, through everything. And you know what's strange? What's almost unbelievable is that births never grow old, never grow tired, never lose their power. The mothers change. They're younger now, some of them, younger than ever before. The times change, technology revolutionizes itself, the thoughts about birth and woman and child keep changing. But a birth itself, the moment of a birth, always stays new, always stays wonderful and terrible at once. Always. Every time is like the first time for me, even if not for the mother, who might have experienced it 5 times already. I asked her, or perhaps she asked herself. Perhaps she spoke to me like to a mirror. What's hardest after 46 years? After 50 years of work? And she answered quickly, as though she'd answered this question 100 times already, 1,000 times perhaps. Or perhaps never really aloud, but it was contained in the sentence, in her bones, in her voice, in her whole existence. The hardest thing is to hold the balance, the exact balance, between hope and caution, between joy and fear, between the joy of new life and the fear of failure, of death, of the unexpected. A birth is always both, always, not either or, but both at once. It's beautiful, wonderful, almost sacred, a moment where life emerges from life, where hope becomes reality, becomes a screaming, breathing, living child. And it's dangerous, terribly dangerous, can give everything or take everything, can be joy or sorrow, can be life or death. And I have to hold both sides simultaneously at the same time, together, side by side, in my 2 old hands, in my tired head, in my full heart. She showed me her hands, small, practical, with short nails and scars everywhere. Scars from wounds, scars from work, scars from years, scars from life. These hands have helped 1,000 babies into the world, perhaps 2,000, perhaps more. I've never counted. Who counts? They look old, but they're still strong, very strong still. They look tired, but they're still ready, always still ready, always open. And every time I sit there with a mother in her room, in her fear, in her space, and I think, if something goes wrong, if the baby doesn't breathe, if the heart doesn't beat, if the bleeding doesn't stop, these hands are responsible. These hands should have known, should have prevented it, should have been faster. That doesn't go away. No, I feel that every time, every day, every night, in every room, with every mother. But then she told me about a child, 3 years ago, just 3 years ago, not long ago, still within reach of her memory, whose heart wasn't beating right, whose rhythm was wrong, whose life was already in question, already before birth, still in the darkness. And how she noticed, before the mother noticed, that something was wrong, before the mother felt the pain properly, understood it properly. And how this noticing, this inner knowing, this quick, right action saved the life, saved the child, saved the mother, saved a family. "I'm not God," she said, slowly, thoughtfully, as though she needed to assure herself. "I'm not even sure I read correctly what the bodies tell me, what these female bodies show me from within, what the babies' hearts tell me in the dark. I'm just an old woman with experience, with hands, with knowledge. But these 2,000 babies, they're awake. They're in the world. They're in schools, on streets, in beds, in the air, breathing, living, becoming. And that is, even though I don't believe God planned it like that, even though I'm not sure if there's a God or not, that is enough. That's more than enough for a life. That's all a life needs." Morning came slowly, not suddenly, but like a grace approaching, unobtrusively, quietly. The grey became lighter, became a soft pink, became a fine orange, became a soft yellow on the eastern side of the sky, where the sun rises, where the day begins, where life renews itself, every day, without question, without hesitation. And the midwife fell asleep at some point, without my noticing, without her announcing it. Simply, she was tired, deeper tired than words can say. Her head tilted slightly to the left, against the window, against the cold glass. The glass that shows the cold outside, but doesn't let it through. Her hands still in her lap, her old, working hands. The bundle with the instruments beside her, ready for the next journey, ready for the next mother, ready for the next life. But even in sleep, I could see that she was completely ready, absolutely ready, prepared, ready for the next birth, the next mother, the next fear, the next hope, the next victory, the next moment where life emerges from life, new, wonderful, dangerous, almost sacred. And she would be there, immediately, without thinking, with her old hands, with her quiet, knowing voice, with her half-century of experience, with her whole soul, with her whole love for birth, for life, for people. The train continues forward, rhythmically. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And the sun comes, slowly, growing bright. The world becomes bright and awake and alive again. But I still sit in the half-light of the compartment and think of all the babies, awake, breathing, crying, laughing, playing. Because this woman, this old woman, this midwife, was awake, was present, was ready. And somehow that comforts me deeply, very deeply, in a place where fear cannot enter. The world keeps going, not by machines, not by plans, not by technology, but by people, by old people who know their hands, who know their limits, who know their abilities deeply, and who are ready to use them every night, every hour, every birth. And I grow slowly tired again, so gently, so surely. Morning becomes a dream. The sun grows warm, and my eyes fall shut. Heavy, safe, loved. A light in the window. Only that, only this one light, is the first thing I see as the train travels between Interlaken and Brienz, a route I've traveled 100 times, and now the 101st. In a night cold the way only alpine nights are cold, a cold that cuts into the bones, that freezes your breath, that turns the window into an ice border, a boundary between the warm compartment and the black, stone world outside. The window belongs to a house clinging to a slope, embedded in stone in the mountain, as though the mountain itself holds the house, protective, ancient arms of stone and history. The house could easily slip from the cliff into the darkness below, into the valley, into the abyss, into infinity. But it doesn't. It stays firm, unmoved, in its place, for decades perhaps, for a century perhaps, for more than a human lifetime. And the light stays too, burning in its window, steadfast, golden, waiting, living, breathing almost like a living organism, like a heart beating in the night. It's not blinking light, not neon, not the fast modern lights that hit your eye, blind you, confuse you, draw you into chaos. It's steady light, constant light, a light that doesn't flicker, doesn't pulse, doesn't want to play with you, doesn't try to buy your attention. Yellow, warm, comfortable light, born of an old bulb, a warm yellow that makes everything gentle, not LED bright and robotic, not that artificial coldness sitting in modern rooms that exhausts you. It gives me immediately the thought that someone sits there, at night, alone, in this house on the mountain, at this height, in this cold, in this solitude, and perhaps reads, wears reading glasses on a nose that has also read for many decades, thousands of pages, many worlds, or waits for someone, for a return, for a call that never comes, for a letter that never arrives, or thinks about life, decisions, branches, paths not taken, journeys not made, or simply doesn't sleep, can't sleep, wakes every night like this moment. And that's simply how this person lives, with the light, in this stillness, in this acceptance. The train passes by, fast, relentless, rhythmic, and I see the window only for a few seconds, perhaps 10, perhaps 20, perhaps 25. But that's enough. That's completely enough. There was a woman in my childhood who had such a light, exactly like this. A light like this that marks itself on my retina now, in this moment, as the train passes by. She lived in a house up on a hill, not close to the village, but visible from everywhere. From school I could see it, small and golden, a point in the darkness, like an inland lighthouse. And every night when I looked out from my window, the light was on, always, reliably, like a constant in a life that was anything but constant. My grandmother said the woman couldn't sleep, that she had an illness, something nervous, something in the soul that wouldn't let her rest. She sat awake all night and looked out the window at the village, at the lights, at the people passing. But perhaps, I thought even then, when I was still small, perhaps that's not suffering, not really. Perhaps that's how some people are with themselves at night, How some people don't fight their loneliness, but embrace it, like an old friend, like a familiar voice. How some people are alone with themselves, and not only endure it, but bless it. The light of the train is warm around me. The compartment is filled with this warm, seasonless warmth, from the heating sitting under steam, humming quietly. And outside it's dark, completely dark. Alpine air, cold pressing against the window. And somewhere up there, in this house on the slope, in this house on the stone, sits a person. I don't know if a woman or a man, if old or young, if sad or peaceful, if lonely or fulfilled in themselves, and perhaps watches this train passing by, this swift movement in their quiet night, this interruption in their eternity, and perhaps thinks, who sits in this train and looks up at my window? What does he see? What does he think of me? Am I lonely, or am I wise? And we don't meet. We don't really see each other. Not with these outer eyes. But for a moment, for a precious second, we're both awake at the same time. Both of us see a light in the night. Both pause. Both acknowledge that the other exists, that the world isn't empty, that there are other hearts beating too. Beating, beating, beating. Brienz comes closer. I feel it distinctly now. The wheels change their rhythm. The rattle becomes deeper, becomes different, becomes another song. And the train brakes slightly, loses speed, as though the mountain landscape itself wants to slow us down, hold us, not let us go. The mountains grow higher, bigger, narrower. Space shrinks, rock faces draw closer, and the light disappears behind a stone slope, is extinguished by rock, becomes memory, becomes longing. But it remains in my eyes, in my consciousness, carved like an inscription, an after-image that doesn't fade, a memento that stays alive, a gift I didn't ask permission for, but accept gratefully. It's possible, even likely, that I've passed this house before, 100 times, and never noticed. It's possible I saw it, but didn't perceive it. My eye looked through it like through glass. It's possible this is the first and only time I see that it's there, that a person sits there and stays awake, that the light breathes. And that's all right too, completely all right. Some things only need to be seen once to be complete, to do their work, to change the heart. I think of how many lights there are in this world, everywhere on this earth, in windows, in houses, in remote places, on mountains, in valleys, on flat plains, in cities of millions, and how each light is a story, a person, a heart still breathing, still awake, still hoping. And I'm only one person. The train travels only one route. I see only one window. But this one window connects me with all the other lights, with all the other people still not sleeping in this night, who are still awake, still thinking. We all sit in our rooms, at our windows, looking out or in, and we're connected through this moment, through this night, through this knowledge that we're not alone, not really alone. The train continues forward, faster now, momentum builds, the rattle becomes steady, ta-dum, ta-dum, and the mountains grow bigger, darker, almost frighteningly beautiful. A beauty that frightens you because it seems so endless, so relentless. And there are fewer and fewer visible lights. The civilized world falls away, falls back behind us, behind the mountains, behind the curves, into another time. And what remains is only darkness and form, rock and possible snow high on the peaks, cold and height. And somewhere, far away now, behind the mountains, behind the stone slopes, a light in a window that still burns, I'm quite sure, though I can see it no longer, though it's disappeared from my view. And that's enough for me. That's completely enough, more than enough. A light in the darkness is all I need to know that someone's still awake, that someone's still there, that I'm not alone in this world, that the world isn't empty of spirit and consciousness and love. And slowly, very slowly, my eyes grow dark, grow tired, become irresistibly heavy, filled with lead, filled with sleep. The rattle of the wheels has a special rhythm tonight. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. And it reminds me of an evening many years ago. So many years ago that I'm not quite sure if it really happened or if I dreamed it. On the Constance to Romanshorn mine, Swiss side, the mountains dark beside us. It was one of those nights when you don't quite know which century you're in, what time it is, what reality is. The lights outside could be anywhere in the past. Time itself becomes liquid, becomes water, becomes air. I saw an old man in my compartment, perhaps 80, perhaps 100. He was so old that age had lost its meaning. He sat across from me and he slept, but not properly. He slept and woke and slept again as though his body couldn't decide what it wanted, whether it wanted to be alive or dead, whether it wanted to be in this world or another. His hands lay in his lap and they were rough, scarred, stained with ink, or was it carbon? Or was it only time itself, the color of time? In my dream, and I think I'd already slipped into my dream, I was no longer quite awake. I asked him what he'd worked at, what he'd done his whole life. And he opened his eyes, but not fully, not completely, just wide enough that a thin ray of reality came in, a ray from very far away. "I was a telegraphist," he said, and his voice was thin, old, but very precise, like the ticking of an antique clock, regular, steady, old as time itself. From 1890 to 1953, 66 years, that's my whole life, everything, dits and dahs, dots and dashes, codes and symbols that held the world together. I received and sent messages from very far away, plucked words from the air the way a fisherman pulls fish from the water, with nets, with patience, with love. I must say that his eyes, although he was so old, although he was so tired, they lit up while he spoke. They shone like lights in the night, and I felt I was witnessing something great, something the world has lost. "And you know," he continued, and his voice grew even more tender, even older, as though someone were speaking from very far away, from 100 years' distance. The most beautiful thing about it wasn't the technology. It was never the technology, electricity, magnetism. All that was only the tool, only the language. The beauty was the way I was connected to the people, to the living, breathing people who were very far away, but whom I was close to through this code, through this language that only a few understood, only the initiated. A woman in Constance sends me a message, her heart full of hope and fear and love. She writes in Morse code, "My son has come back from the war. He is alive." I write it down with my hand trembling with joy, with empathy, and tap it out on the wireless apparatus, and the message flies through the air, invisible, unheard, but real, truly real. And somewhere in Zurich, another telegraphist receives that same message, and his hand trembles too, and he gives it to the son's family. And for a moment, just one sacred moment, all people are together. The woman, the son, me, the other telegraphist in Zurich, all the telegraphists in the world, connected through this little melody of current and light, of dots and dashes, that carries a message of love. Every message was a poem, he said, and now his eyes were a bit more open, a bit more awake, as though memory were waking him from 100-year sleep. Not because the words themselves were beautiful, often they were dry, businesslike, brief, but because they mattered, really mattered. Because they reached someone somewhere far away and changed something in his life. I transmitted proposals of marriage with a trembling hand. I brought news of death, of births, birth announcements, military orders, peace messages. Everything went through my hands, these hands here, and I was part of every moment, whether I always wanted to be or not. Sometimes I didn't want to be part of it. Sometimes the messages were too heavy. I asked him if he missed it, that life, that work, that time. And he laughed, a soft, old laugh, like an echo from very far away. All the time, he said, every day. But not the way you miss something tangible, not the way you miss an object. It's like I miss the way the world sounded back then, the ticking, the dit-dit-da, the Morse code sound, everywhere, in my head, even now, in the air when it rains, in the wires still hanging somewhere. The whole world was one great musical instrument, one great living instrument, and I was one of thousands of musicians playing it, giving that music life. I watched him as he spoke, and I understood that he wasn't bitter. He was sad. He was wistful, but not bitter. He'd spent his life connecting the world, connecting people, delivering messages, and that was enough. That was a good life. Even if the world had forgotten him, time had forgotten him, the craft had died out, he wasn't bitter. Now it's all instant, he said. And now it was as though he were waking from very deep sleep, as though he were returning to the present, to the 21st century, to the digital age. A message no longer needs time, no longer travels, no longer takes a physical journey. It's just there, instant, immediate. And I've lost everything, the patience, the suspense in the waiting, the connection you felt while you waited for the reply, the fact that a message was worth something because it was difficult to send, because it needed time, because it didn't come straight away. Now everything is worthless, everything is bluff, everything is sensation, because everything comes instantly, now, instant. And people don't understand what they've lost. They have no idea. Before he falls asleep, he says one more thing, very quietly, almost inaudibly. Love is in the details, in the dots and dashes, in the patience, in the attention. That's what the telegraphists taught me, all together, all these people I knew, that I heard, that I felt, even though I never saw them. And then he closes his eyes. The man falls asleep now, not half asleep, but fully, completely. He sinks away into his dream, into his memory, into the time of 100 years ago, 200 years ago, into all times at once, and his face becomes peaceful, becomes young again, becomes the night itself. And I stay awake and listen to the train, and yes, it sounds like a telegraph signal. Ta-dum-dit, ta-dum-dit, again and again, endless. A rhythm like a heartbeat, like life itself pulsing. And I'm now in the now, on the train, on the line from Konstanz to Romanshorn in Switzerland. And at the same time, I'm in 1920 and in 1890, in all times, am everywhere and nowhere at once. And time disappears, melts away, because memory is bigger than the present, because the past still lives, still speaks, still sings, and my heart beats like a telegraph signal. Dot, dash, dot, dash, dot. And I sink away into that old, twisted, beautiful time, when everything was still music, when everything still had meaning, when every sign mattered, when every message carried a soul. It happens every night, this phenomenon. Something I've been observing for years. Something I can't explain, but which never fails to surprise me. Every time we pass through a station at 3 o'clock in the morning, the exact hour, the hour of deepest silence, when the world sleeps, when even dreams are sleeping, and I look up at the great clock on the platform, the station clock, I see that it is stopped. Always, every time, at 3. Not at 2 or 4, exactly 3. Both hands parallel, pointing upwards together, like arms reaching towards heaven. It's like a sign the night gives me, a secret message that only I understand, that only I see. I try to explain this observation rationally. It's a station clock, probably an old one. The battery dead, a gear jammed, a broken spring. These things happen when they grow old. They stop working, they freeze. They become monuments to the past. That's all perfectly rational. But at night, when the train passes through that station, when I see that clock, time stopped, the hands frozen in eternity, then it isn't rational. It's sacred. On the line from Mannheim to Worms, it happened again. It always happens again. I always find this clock. And this time the station was so brightly lit by old station lamps that I could see clearly. The clock on the roof of the station building, that stone and iron clock, showed exactly 3 o'clock. Not 3:00:00. The seconds didn't matter. Both hands stood parallel, both pointing upwards, like twins holding hands. And below everything was dark and still, a deep stillness that was almost physical. Not a sound on the platform, not a soul. Only this clock that had stopped time, that refused to move on. And it was as though it were speaking to me, as though it were talking to me in that silence. Here, now. Here and now. Stay here. Stay forever. I've tried to understand these clocks. I've read books about the mechanics of station clocks, about their history. They were built to keep time, to keep the trains running on schedule, to bring order to chaos. But eventually they fail. The reason is technical. The battery dies, a gear jams, a spring breaks, time becomes too heavy. But when you travel through a station at night and see a stopped clock, a clock that no longer works, that stands frozen in eternity, then that isn't technical. That's sacred. That's a moment that refuses to pass, that says, no, I don't stop. I'm here. The clock isn't saying, no, it's not really past 3. It's saying, it's still 3. It will always be 3. I travel this line again and again. Mannheim to Worms, or Worms to Mannheim, or quite different routes. And always, when 3 o'clock comes, 3 in the morning, the hour of the moon, the hour of silence, we pass through a station. And always I see a clock, and always it stands still. And always it shows 3. I've counted 20 times, 45 times, 100 times. It's not chance. It's not a statistical anomaly. It's something else. It's a truth the night wants to show me, that time wants to show me. and I understand it now. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, the magical hour, when the night is at its deepest, when sleep is at its darkest, when all dreams, all nightmares, all hopes are stuck in their darkest, deepest core. The hour when time itself grows tired, when time itself gives up and says, I can't go on anymore, I'm tired. I stay here, 3 o'clock, that's enough. That's the hour of silence, the hour of stillness, the hour when the world stops breathing. And on this line, from Mannheim to Worms, we travel every night. Every night in those months, those years, those decades, as long as I've been riding this train. And every night at 3 o'clock, I see something. A light, a movement, a shape. It could be the clock. It could be something else, I don't know. But my heart knows. My body knows. In my sleep, I feel it. 3 o'clock, the hour, the sacred hour. The train passes through Mannheim, or it could be any other station, any station in Germany, in Europe, anywhere in the world. And the clock looks down on us, that old iron clock, and it speaks to me, and I understand its language now, completely. Look, time is just an invention. Look at me, I'm stopped. I'm not broken, I'm not damaged, I'm perfect. I've understood that there's only this one moment. There's only this one moment. There's always only this one clock, this 1 hour, 3 o'clock, the eternal, still, deep hour of night. The hour that doesn't pass, the hour that lasts forever. And I lean my head back on the pillow. It's warm. It smells of dust and time. And the clock is still there, still visible, still stopped at 3. And it's still 3. It will always be 3. And I sink into that hour, into this deep, quiet, eternal hour where time no longer ticks, where everything simply is, without becoming, without passing, without aging. 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. Always 3 o'clock. The sacred hour. The hour of peace. And my eyes close, and I am 3 o'clock. And the night is 3 o'clock. And everything is 3 o'clock. Forever. I met the engine driver on the Bremen to Osnabrück line on one of those spring evenings, when it's still cold, when the frost still clings to the earth, but the air begins to smell of renewal, of soil and grass, of spring's promise. She sat in the dining car in her dark blue railway uniform, which looked dignified and at rest, and on her table lay a small gift, wrapped in brown paper, bound with string. She told me later, in a calm voice, that this was her last day of service. 30 years in the railway's employ, 30 years driving locomotives, and tomorrow she would be retired, would be at home, for the first time in 3 decades. She was a large woman, taller than most men, with short hair that had turned gray, the hair of someone who'd spent a whole life in the sun. And her hands were powerful, marked with scars, with stains, with the signs of 30 years' work. The hands of someone who knows how to set things in motion, how to command machines, how to apply force, how to negotiate with metal and oil and fire. I began when practically no women were driving locomotives, she said, without bitterness, not with complaint, but with pride. That was 1993. That was before anything else. My first supervisor, Herr Bergmann, an old man with a thick mustache, said to me, "You won't last. Women and machines, they don't go together. It's not suitable." He meant it's not right. But I persevered. I wanted to drive. The locomotive was my calling, from the very beginning. She took a sip of coffee, slowly, very slowly, with a kind of ritual, as though she was showing herself respect, as though she were deliberately inhabiting a precious moment, being fully present. She spoke with a certainty that only people who truly know a thing possess. I listened to her, and I imagined her sitting in the cab at the front of the locomotive, feeling the whole world beneath her. How she drives the hills up and down, through valleys, over bridges, over rivers. Alone with a machine, alone with a dream. "The first thing I learned was listening," she said. "Listening your whole life long. The locomotive tells you everything when you go into the cab, when you really listen with your whole heart, when you don't just drive. The engine has a voice, the wheels have a voice, even the braking is a language, almost a prayer. And if you don't know the language, if you don't listen, then you drive blind, you make mistakes, you damage the machine. But the machine wants to help you, it wants to trust you, but only if you understand it." She described to me the feeling of driving a locomotive. It wasn't dominion, not control, not mastery, but something much deeper, something almost sacred. "We move together," she said slowly, deliberately. "Together. I don't try to command it, I drive it. The way you dance a waltz, the music sets the direction and you follow the rhythm. But you must also bring your own strength, your passion, your will, your whole self." She showed me a photograph from an album too, a locomotive from 1995, a large diesel engine, black and gray, powerful. "That was my first," she said. "I remember every meter I traveled with her, from the first day to the last. It wasn't the most beautiful locomotive, not the fastest, but it was mine, and I was hers." She told me of a night, of a moment that defined her, I think. A child on a level crossing between the tracks had become stuck. A boy, perhaps 10 years old, he'd fallen, couldn't get up, lay on the rails. She saw him from above in the cab, had only seconds, perhaps 10 seconds before impact. She could have pulled the emergency brake, but that would have brought the train to an emergency stop, and everyone would have been injured. The driver herself, the conductors, all 100 passengers would have been badly hurt. So she had to find another way, a difficult, seemingly impossible way. With the rhythm, with her fine feeling for the machine, with 30 years of experience and love for the locomotive, she managed it. She applied the brake gradually, intelligently, gently, and calmed the locomotive, the way you'd calm a horse about to bolt. The train slowed, slower and slower, and the child could roll clear, could get away. He was safe. And the locomotive understood. "But I never told anyone about that," she said quietly. "That was only between me and the locomotive, between a woman and a machine that loved each other. That was our secret." The gift on her table, when I asked her what was inside, she opened it very slowly, respectfully. It was an album of photographs, a large, heavy album bound in blue linen, heavy as her love. All her locomotives. She'd photographed each one, had driven a different one on each important day of her life. First locomotive, 100th locomotive, 1000th journey, final day. And she had gathered them all, sorted them, documented them. Years of photographs, years of life, years of love. Documented in images, in black and white, in color, in time. "I'm taking this with me into retirement," she said, and her voice trembled a little. "So I don't forget. So I know all my life that I wasn't just an engine driver, not just a woman at the controls of a machine. I was more than that. I was part of something great. I was the rhythm. I was the force that keeps this whole world in motion, that brings people together, that brings people home, every single day." She got out at Osnabrück, a station in the evening, lit up, full of people. But for her, it was empty. She was the only one. And that was the last time she stepped out of a locomotive as a worker, as a driver, as the woman who commands the machine, who holds life in her hands. She took her album, the heavy blue album, and I watched her walk slowly down the platform, one step after another, not hastily, but with dignity, like a queen leaving a throne. And she turned around one last time to look at the locomotive one more time, her first and this last. And I saw her raise her hand in a gesture that wasn't farewell, but gratitude. And the locomotive seemed to understand. And I stay in my compartment and think of this woman and of all the people who work quietly, who keep things in motion, who are invisible to the world, whom nobody thanks, whom nobody sees. And yet, they are the most important people on this earth. They are artists, artists of patience and strength, of quiet service. The train carries on, away from Osnabrück, into the dark night, and I hear the locomotive ahead, that strong heartbeat, that ta-tum, ta-tum, that prayer. And I know that someone there above, a person with hands and a great heart with strong hands, carries us all, gently, steadily, safely, quite safely. And my eyes grow so heavy, so warm, like steam, and I sink into the motion, the good, reliable, loving motion of the night. On the Davos to Philosur line, in one of those winters when the snow falls so thickly that you can't see your own hand before your face, when the windows turn simply gray, when the world shrinks down to the size of a train compartment, I met a woman sharing my compartment, perhaps in her mid-50s, perhaps older, hard to say, with a checked scarf about her shoulders and a thick notebook before her, which she wrote in constantly. The snow fell and fell, endless, as though the world were dissolving into white, and she wrote and wrote page after page in a neat, steady hand, utterly concentrated. I couldn't resist asking what she was doing, what she was writing down. She looked up and smiled, not a broad smile, but a quiet one, a secret smile, as though she were sharing a mystery with me. "I'm counting the snowflakes," she said simply, very calmly. "I'm counting the snowflakes." And before I could speak, before I could ask if she'd lost her mind, she explained gently, "Not all of them. That would be impossible. You can't count the world. But the ones that hit my window, the flakes that fall on this little pane here, those I count. Every one. I keep a tally for some time now, 4 years, since my husband died." She told me her husband had been a meteorologist, a passionate, devoted meteorologist, who gave his whole life to the data of nature. And he'd always taken measurements everywhere, in every season, in every light, temperature, humidity, wind speed, rainfall. He was also possessed by a need to understand everything, to count everything. And then he was suddenly gone on a winter's day, an aneurysm, quick, without warning. And suddenly the world was full of data, full of measurements he would never be able to gather. "So I began," she said, "with my own project. Not snowfall in millimeters, the way he would have done it, with his instruments and his charts, but the flakes themselves, the individual flakes, the ones that hit my window, each single one. I write down the time, how fast they're falling, whether they fall alone or in groups, their shape, roughly, but I can tell the difference between dendritic and needles and plates, hexagonal structures. And every night, before I sleep, I count what I've seen." She showed me her notebook. It was kept with care, with columns, many columns, year after year, day by day. The handwriting was small, neat, methodical. The handwriting of a scientist. Data, numbers, observations. "Today, so far, it's been 3,100, she said, looking down at the current page, at the small tally marks. "That's well above average for this time of day, for this altitude. The snowfall grows heavier the closer we get to Philosur, the higher we climb. I've noticed that over the years." I asked her what good the numbers are, why she needs them, and she looked out the window for a long time, where snow still fell endlessly, before she answered. She showed me pages in her notebook from 2 years ago, from last winter. Numbers everywhere, thousands of numbers. "Most people think this is madness," she said matter-of-factly, "that I'm mad. But my husband wasn't mad, and this isn't mad either. It's a prayer, I'd say. a prayer in the form of numbers. "My husband taught me so much," she said. Her voice grew quieter still, more tender, as though she were speaking to him. He said, "Nature isn't chaotic the way people think. Nature is order, but not the order humans make, not symmetry and straight lines. It's a different kind of order, a more beautiful kind. Fractals, patterns that repeat themselves. And if you don't understand that order, then you learn it by looking and counting and paying attention with your whole heart. So I look, here at the window, and I pay attention, every flake. And whether the numbers mean anything in the end, I don't know, perhaps not. But while I'm counting, I'm with my husband. I see the world the way he would see it. I see the order he saw. I hear him speaking while I count. And that's enough. That's more than enough. I watched her turn to a fresh page, a blank sheet, and begin to write. "Today, on this journey," she said as she wrote, "from Davos to Filisur, it's been 3,100 so far. But there'll be more. The snow falls all evening. By the time we reach Filisur, it may be 6,000 or more." My husband would have loved that number. He would have said, "That's natural order. That's proof." At Filisur, she got out, a small station deep in snow, utterly quiet, and I watched her still, saw her notebook in her hand, watched her as she stood carefully, held her notebook close to her heart. The snowflakes keep falling, endless numbers of them, they always will, and she'll go on counting them wherever she goes as long as it snows. And I understood in that moment that what she's doing isn't grief. No, grief isn't the right word. It's love. A particular, concrete way of keeping love alive by looking and paying attention and counting, by turning love into numbers, into data, into order. And as I think this, as the train carries on from Filisur into the dark night, my eyes grow heavy, so heavy as snow piling up, and the rhythm of the flakes becomes the rhythm of the wheels, ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. 1, 2, 3,000, into the night. And I no longer count. I simply sink gently into the white, warm dream of numbers, of love, of counting without end. I met the typesetter on the Leipzig to Plauen line on one of those winter evenings when the frost sits so hard that the window panes turn to crystal, when the trees look like frozen light, like artworks made of ice and air. He was a quiet man, perhaps 60, perhaps older, with fingers that had curved gently over the years, not from illness, not from arthritis, but from the craft itself, from decades of working with lead and metal and tiny letters. And on the table before him lay an old piece of type, a lead letter, heavy and dark, with a patina that spoke of time. And he kept lifting it, turning it over, studying it, as though he could read something in it, as though a whole story lived in that single letter. I asked him what he was holding there in his hands, and his face brightened, not suddenly, not too quickly, more like someone lighting a lamp in a darkened room. "It's an E," he said softly. "An E from my first font. My very first alphabet of type. I learned the craft, you see, in Leipzig back in 1976. That's a long time ago now. We had an old master, Herr Hoffmann, a big man with a white beard, and he showed me everything, how to hold the lead properly, not gripping it, but with respect, how to place the sorts in the composing case, in what order, how to feel the impression, not just with your eyes, but with your fingers, with your whole hand. He showed me, very slowly, how to hold the letter properly, and his hands moved with such tenderness, as if he were cradling a fragile bird, one that mustn't fly away, one that trusted him completely. "People don't understand it anymore," he said. And it didn't sound bitter. He wasn't bitter about the world, but sad, accepting, wistful. Today, it's all computers, pixels, bits and bytes, all digital, all invisible, all fleeting as air. Nothing you can hold and say, I made this will endure. But with this lead, it was different. It's still different. You choose every letter by hand, every single one, and place it next to the next. Every decision is final. And while you're doing it, you have to think not just about what you want to say, not just about the words, but about the beauty of each letter itself. Every letter has a soul, a character. This E here, for instance. Do you see how the serif falls away elegantly? How the lines come together into something complete? It's a work of art, this E, 3 or 4 millimeters high. A work of art. And if you set down the wrong letter, if your hand trembles, if you're not careful, then you have to begin again. There's no undo, no digital correction, no second chance. There's only start over. You have to repeat it from the beginning, letter by letter. I couldn't stop watching him. The way he turned the letter over, examining it from every angle, as though it were a precious stone, a diamond. The train windows showed the winter landscape rolling past, bare trees, snow-covered fields, small houses with smoke curling from their chimneys. But he noticed nothing of it. His whole world was concentrated on that single letter, on this moment. His passion was catching. I saw how his eyes lit up when he spoke of the old days. This isn't just a craft, he said. It's a philosophy. It's a way of understanding the world. Every book I set, and I've set hundreds, thousands of pages, was a dialogue between me and the author. The author writes the words. I transfer them into lead. And between these two acts, between writing and printing, something new is born. A collaboration, a partnership across time. I watched him as he arranged the letters, first in the air with his hand, moving them back and forth, ordering them in his mind, but so precisely, so surely, as though they were frozen there in the air, as though the air itself were holding them. Every book is a prayer, he said slowly. Not because it's sacred, many books aren't sacred, but because you spend so long with it. You touch every single page, you look at every letter many times, hundreds of times. You place each letter 1,000 times over if the book is large. And in the end, you know who this author is better than the readers ever will. You know the way his mind works, his rhythms, the way he thinks. And if the book is good, really good, a great book, then you notice too that the impression recognizes it, that the machine recognizes it, that even the paper recognizes it. I asked him how much longer he'd be working, how long he still had the strength for it. And he showed me his hands. They weren't weak. They didn't tremble. As long as these hands can work, he said, as long as the memory lives in them. And that memory is longer than the body. That memory is immortal. I asked him if he still sets type, if he still works with this old craft day in, day out. And he laughed quietly, very quietly, the way you share a secret. Not day after day anymore, but yes, I still set. All the last printing houses have closed, one by one. First in the 80s, then in the 90s, then in the 2000s. There's practically none left now. It's a dying trade, like tiling roofs or forging knives. But I still do it sometimes, privately, almost secretly. For friends, for myself. Little poems on thick paper, love letters for people who still know what that means. Birthday wishes, words of thanks. All set by hand and printed on an old machine. A Heidelberg model. The one I still have down in my cellar. And my hands remember everything. They can't forget it, even if I did. They need this work. They need the feel of lead in their palms, the cold lead, the rhythm of the press, the warmth of the machine that lives and breathes. He got out at plowin', An old station, dignified and gray. I watched him still, saw his silhouette on the platform, and I saw how he carried that single lead E in his hand like a treasure, like something beyond price, like the only link to his past, to a time when he was young, when the world was still made of lead and paper, when words still carried the weight of metal. And I understood in that moment, this craft, this thing that's dying away, that nobody practices anymore, that no young people are learning, it lives on in his fingers, in the way he touches things, in the knowledge he carries that every object has beauty if you understand it long enough, if you tend to it with all the love a person can give, with all the attention and devotion. The train travels on through the winter night, through valleys and small villages whose names I don't know, and I feel the cold out there, the winter's bite, the harsh cold of the modern world where beauty no longer counts for anything. But here inside I'm warm, so warm as if I'm sitting inside a book, a thick book. And I think of letters, individual letters, of words that come slowly to me, that fit together like blocks, and my heart becomes a printing press. Ta-dum, ta-dum. The wheels of the train become the press, ta-dum. And my eyes close, slowly, gently, the way you close a book, and sleep, and dream of letters moving. I met the old station master on the line from Cuxhaven to Stade on one of those autumn evenings when the rain falls like fine sand against the windows, pattering, pounding, and the whole world turns gray, blurs like a watercolor left too long in water. He sat across from me in my compartment, this tall old man with a silver mustache, bushy and dignified, still wearing the dark blue railway cap. Not because he was on duty, no, he'd been retired for ages, but because he'd never really stopped being on duty. Because that duty was part of him, as deep as the veins in his hands. We came into a station, Steckenborn or something like it, somewhere between the lakes and rivers of the north. And he rose slowly, very slowly, his joints cracking a little, and looked out at the platform, at the tracks, at the small buildings that now looked old, nearly derelict. And his face changed, not sad, not happy, but something between, something deeper, as though he were remembering something so deep that there were no simple feelings for it. I asked him if he knew this station, and he answered, but not to me, but to himself, to the station. "Knew," he said slowly. "I worked here 40 years. 40. From 6 in the morning until 7 at night, sometimes until 8, every single day except Sunday. That was my life. That was my world." He sat down again and told me about this station, about the time when it was grand, truly grand, full with travelers flowing in and out like a tide, with lorries being loaded, with bustle, with life. About the war years, his voice grew thinner, quieter, when they'd boarded up the windows and refugees came at night, troubled people, lost people, and he helped them stay calm, brought them water, told them they were safe even though the world around them was falling apart. About the post-war years, when the station filled again, differently but full. People coming home, people wanting to go somewhere, people full of hope. And then, slowly, year after year, cars came, roads were built, proper roads with tarmac. The railway became less important, people took their cars. "But I was still there," he said. His voice sounded like regret now. "I was still there every day, even when no one came anymore." He showed me a photograph he carried in his jacket pocket. It was small, faded, brown at the edges, worn by many years, by much handling. The corners were bent. His voice was weak when he spoke of it. The station as it looked 50 years ago, no, 60, full of energy, full of life, with people everywhere. The facade was damaged. There were bullet holes from bombs, deep scratches from time, from war, from all the suffering. One window was boarded up. There were dark stains, but there was still dignity in the building, still beauty, still meaning, still something that said, I was here. I mattered. I knew every stone, he said, and his voice became very quiet, very tender, trembling slightly. Every single one. I lived with them. I knew where the crack in the floor was, second stone from the door on the left, a split that grew wider with the years. I knew which nail in the signal box never stayed tight and always loosened and bothered me every day. I knew the name of every regular passenger, Herr Klein with his large packages, the tobacconist, Frau Hoffmann with her black suitcase who went to her daughter in Bremen, the young man who went to Hamburg every Friday, always at the same time, always with the same briefcase. He touched the photograph with the tip of his forefinger, carefully, tenderly, as though touching a newborn child, something so sacred that one scarcely dared to breathe, that the world around you must fall silent. He remembered every detail of this station, every color, every scent. The smell of coal in the morning when the great locomotives still steamed, the aroma of coffee from the small cafe, the smell of oil and metal from the rails. It wasn't just a workplace, he said quietly. It was my home. I knew this place better than my own house. I knew every corner, every nook. And the people, oh, the people. It'd become like family. For years I saw the same faces, wished them good mornings, asked how their children were, congratulated them on weddings and birthdays. And then, slowly, they disappeared. The old passengers died, new ones came, and after a while none came at all. The railway became less important. Cars, aeroplanes, everything was faster, everything was different. And then he said something that was painful to hear, that echoed in me like a bell that won't stop ringing, that keeps ringing and ringing. You think when you work, when you're in one place a long time, every day, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, you'll stay there too. You and the place are bound together. The place becomes part of you, and you become part of the place. Then it's forever. That's what you think. But it's not like that. It's not like that. His voice broke a little. The place goes on, grows old, becomes forgotten, becomes less important, becomes unimportant, nearly dies. And your heart must somehow go along, even though you don't want to. You want to stay. You grow old with the place, grayer. Your heart grows heavy like the station. But the place keeps changing, becomes something else, becomes not what you knew. And that hurts so much, friend. That's a pain for which there are no words. That hurts so much, you can't sleep at night. We sat quietly for a while, completely quiet. The rain fell outside, still, pounded against the windows, a steady sound, calming and sad at once. And I understood in that moment that this man had spent his whole life looking after something, someone, a place he couldn't save. Watching over it like a shepherd over his flock, faithful and patient. And that had been his life, loyalty to something that didn't need him. His hands trembled slightly as he put the photograph back in his pocket, and I saw that it was a ritual for him, carrying this photograph, looking at it sometimes, touching it. A connection to something that was past, an anchor to a time when he was still young, when the world still made sense, when his life still had purpose. "I'm proud of what I did," he said, very quietly, so quietly I could hardly hear him. "But I'm also tired, so tired. Tired that no one understands, that no one knows how important it was that I was there, that my life, that it counted." He got off and stayed, and didn't wave at me. I watched him stand on the platform in his old railway cap and look around, look slowly around, as though searching for something that wasn't there anymore,
something that perhaps had never been there except in his memory. His silhouette was bent, tired, filled with the weight of years. The train sets off again. I hear the hiss of the brake, the rattle, the wheels finding their rhythm again, and the rain grows softer, quieter, until it's barely a whisper. And I think of all the people, all the station masters, all the workers who grow old in one place, who grow older with the place, who merge with the place. And then the place grows young, becomes modern, becomes something else. And they can't follow. They're too old. And that's so hard, so unbearably hard. And my eyes grow heavy, and the night grows warm around me, warm like a pillow, warm like compassion. And I sink into the rattle of the wheels, that ta-dum, ta-dum, into the rain, into forgetting, that gentle, warm forgetting.
On the line from Friedrichshafen to Lindau, on one of those summer evenings when the Lake Constance light turns green, deep green, like the glass of a very old window, and the air smells of water and warm earth, of reeds and the fine scent of flowers I couldn't name. I found myself across from a woman, perhaps in her mid-70s, with white hair that was long, worn loose like a child's, not bound, not styled. She was perfectly still, not one unnecessary movement, not a word. She simply looked out towards the lake, a surface of water like a great eye that stayed open, that blinked with small waves, and her hands lay like sleeping birds in her lap, motionless, peaceful. I didn't want to speak either. It was one of those evenings where the silence between two people isn't empty, but filled with something living, as though it were a kind of conversation itself, a very deep conversation, without words. The train moved slowly, very slowly, because we were following the lake's shore, tracing the curves of the water, and the rhythm of the wheels grew gentler, more leisurely. Ta-dum, ta-dum, like a patient heartbeat. Through the window, I occasionally saw a pond at the edge of the fields, small, still surfaces of water like mirrors, like eyes. In one of these ponds, just before a village whose lights were beginning to glow in the dusk, I saw a water lily, white, a white bloom, perfect, quite alone in the darkening water, which was like soup, brown and dark. The woman saw it too, and for a second, just a second, she lifted her gaze from the lake and looked at me. And in her face was a smile that didn't leave her face, that didn't pass, but simply was there, like light coming from within. A smile that said, "You saw it too. You saw what I saw." It was like an inner shining, an understanding without words. Then she turned back to the window, back to the lake, to the lights that were now beginning to twinkle. The pond disappeared behind us, became smaller, became a point, became nothing. But in the moment we passed it, in that single instant, something strange happened. The water lily no longer seemed lonely. Suddenly it wasn't alone, even though it was alone. It seemed right, absolutely right in that place. As though it wanted to be there, as though the water wanted to be there just to hold it, to carry it. I watched the woman step onto the platform in Lindau, and I noticed that I'd been holding my breath the whole time. I breathed out now, and it was like a sigh, like relief. It was strange because the woman hadn't spoken a word to me. We'd not communicated except through that one look, that single smile. And yet it was as though she'd told me something very important, something I can't put into words, but something I've understood in my heart. The water lily on the pond, it wasn't merely a flower, it was a symbol. Or perhaps it was nothing more than what it was,
a white bloom on dark water. And that was enough. That was all that was needed. We arrived in Lindau. I hear the brake, the squeal of wheels, the train slowing. Zook, zook, zook. And the woman rose, slowly, very slowly, like someone just waking from a dream. And I saw that she held a book in her hand, an old book with a linen spine. Blue was its color, and the title was barely legible now, the words worn by many hands. She left the compartment without a word, not angry, but quiet. She needed no words. But as she passed my seat, she placed her hand on my shoulder, just for a second. The hand was warm, and I felt in it an entire story, a story of solitude, of beauty, of the realization that you're not alone when you see the right things. Then she was gone, disappeared onto the platform, and I remained alone in the compartment.
The train carries on from Lindau, away from the lake, into the mountain night. And I still sit at my window and look out at the dark landscape. Sometimes I see a beam of light from a house. Sometimes I see the shape of a tree, black against the darker dark of the sky. And I think of the woman and her quiet eyes, and I think of the water lily I saw in that one moment. And I'm grateful for this meeting, grateful for this sign, grateful that life gives these moments, these small moments that change everything without letting you know they're changing you. I sit now in the darkness of the compartment, the train carrying on, and I think of this woman and the water lily on the pond. And it's clear to me that sometimes you're not alone simply because you're sitting beside someone. And sometimes you're quite alone, and that's not terrible, that's not lonesome. That's something entirely different. Sometimes you're alone, and that's right, that's good, that's necessary. Like the water lily on the pond, surrounded by water but not crowded, not trapped. It floats, it glows, it's not lost, it's simply there, where it should be, where it's good. And I think, that's me too. That's all of us too. We're like the water lily, white and beautiful and alone, and yet not lost, not lost. And my eyes grow so light and so heavy at once. And I am like the water lily, gentle, floating, floating on the water of the night, floating on the wheels of the train. I met the waiter in the dining car on the route from Zurich to Milan, one of those evenings when the sun sinks behind the Alps and the light in the carriage turns golden, like liquid honey pooled on the tablecloths. He was perhaps in his mid-50s, wearing a dark suit as immaculate as his service, no movement wasted, no gesture uncertain. His hands were already attending to the next table before you'd noticed he'd finished the last. I watched him from my seat, the way he held the glasses, not by the rim but by the stem, the manner in which he moved between tables without disturbing anyone, like a bird flying through a room without touching anything. I sat alone at my table, and he brought me dinner with that kind of attention that never feels intrusive but rather like quiet inevitability. The cutlery was warm. I felt it in my hand. The glass stood exactly right, and somehow he'd already known that I prefer to drink from the left and like my napkin on my lap rather than my shoulder. There was no explanation for it. It was simply correct. The train swayed slightly, and the glasses chimed like little bells, but nothing fell. I asked him whether this work, year after year, back and forth between cities, between Zurich and Milan, between mountain and plain, didn't exhaust him. The train rattled over a bridge, and I heard water beneath us. We were crossing a river, and he stood so calmly that he barely seemed to sway, as though the train were moving around him rather than the other way round. I ate slowly and watched him move through the carriage, weaving between tables, bending, straightening, turning with the grace of a dancer who'd trained his whole life for one dance. I thought, this man loves his work. You don't see that often.
You see people doing their work, persisting, counting the hours until the end of the day. But this was different. This was a man entirely present in every moment, devoting his whole attention to what he was doing. And that presence, that inner calm, radiated from him like a lamp shining in darkness. He smiled a little, not broadly, but inwardly, like a door opening slightly and warm light spilling out. And then he said something I still carry with me, something I hear now whenever I sit in a train at night. People think a waiter in a dining car serves. That's what everyone sees. But what I really do is something different. It's not work like any other. It's, how shall I put it? It's a form of attention, a very particular form. I make sure that for an hour, perhaps two, someone feels truly welcome. Not merely tolerated, but genuinely, truly seen. That someone sits down and realizes, I'm not simply a guest here who pays their bill and leaves. I've been seen. The way I drink, my preference, my rhythm, all of that has been noticed by someone, and someone cares about it. That's a great thing for someone traveling alone. And as he spoke, he arranged the plates on the next table, the glasses, the cutlery, and everything happened like a choreography he'd been dancing for 2 decades without ever counting it, without ever getting it wrong. The movements were so fluid, so natural, they became invisible like breathing. Only the result was visible. Perfection, order, quiet beauty. I asked him how many people he served in this carriage per night, and he gave me a number. 20, sometimes 25, sometimes more, depending on how full the train was. And no two are alike, he said. One needs peace. He wants to eat in quiet, the music in the background, the rattle of the wheels beneath the table, the lights sliding past. Another wants to talk about the journey, about the weather, about his life, and I'm there to listen. One notices immediately when I know his preference, milk in the coffee before sugar, the butter on the left plate, and that makes him happy. It gives him the feeling of being noticed. Another never notices, he's too caught up in himself. But I notice that he doesn't notice, and that's fine too. Because sometimes attention isn't meant for the other person. Sometimes it's meant for the work itself. I tried to understand what he meant, and as I ate, the soup was wonderfully warm, touched with herbs. I watched him. How he went to an elderly couple and poured exactly the right amount of wine without being asked, as though reading their shared thoughts. How he conducted a brief, precise conversation with a businessman. Can I improve anything for you? No, thank you. Everything's perfect. And then left him entirely in peace, respecting his space. How he explained to a child what gnocchi were. These little soft pillows from potatoes, you see. They swim in the water like little fish, and then we catch them. And acted as though he were hearing this question for the first time in his life, as though it were the most important question of the evening. He came to me again later, after most guests had finished eating and the carriage had slowed because we were descending into valleys, into the night between the mountains. The light outside was now a deep violet blue, almost black, and inside the carriage the lighting grew softer, more golden. The guests were tired, satisfied, sated. The waiter carried an empty bottle, a few plates, but his face was so calm as though he'd just had hours free. I told him his job seemed to me like an art form, like a kind of dance or music. He nodded, but not smugly, rather thoughtfully. It's not art, he said quietly. It's attention. Simply that. Attention. And you know what's remarkable? Attention is the opposite of tiredness. The more attentive you truly are, really attentive, not superficially, the less tired you become, because attention fills you. It lives in you. You don't need energy when you're truly present. The train carries on through the night, and I sit in my compartment. It's dark now. Only blue moonlight streams through the window, soft and cool. And I think of this man, doing the same thing thousands of times, and yet making it the first time for each person. This patience, this boundless willingness, each movement, each gesture, each smile, as though it were the first time, the only time. And I think, that's it. That's the secret. Not the technique, but the inner bearing. Not the perfect movements, but the love within them. The lights of the villages we pass slide by like small, warming flashes in the darkness, like eyes watching us for a moment and then moving on. Sometimes I hear a dog barking in the distance, a church bell. My heart grows heavy and gentle at once, filled with this silence between the mountains, this valley through which we travel. And my eyes grow heavy, so heavy, like lead, so heavy. And I sink into the rhythm of the wheels, into this ta-dum, 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 that sounds like the pulse of the world, like the pulse of someone who is attentive, who is truly present, who gives his whole soul to everything he does, bestows his attention until the last moment.
I met the Carpenter on a train through the Black Forest, on the line from Offenburg to Donaueschingen. That's one of those routes that winds through narrow valleys and through tunnels hewn from stone, and across bridges that hang so high above gorges you can barely see the streams below. The Black Forest in autumn. That's a world unto itself. Firs so tall and so dense that light scarcely penetrates the canopy. Fog hanging in the valleys like cotton. And that smell, that unmistakable smell of resin and damp moss and rotting leaves, so deep and earthy, you feel you're smelling time itself. He was a tall, quiet man in his late 70s, with hands that looked as though they'd been carved from wood themselves. Broad palms, strong fingers, calluses where tools sit. His face was calm, almost withdrawn, but his eyes were awake and kind. And when he spoke, it was slowly and thoughtfully, as though he weighed every word in his hand before uttering it. He wore a work jacket, dark green, with wood shavings on the sleeves that he hadn't brushed away, as though they were part of him. I noticed the shavings and asked if he worked with wood. He nodded and said, "My whole life. Joiner, carpenter, whatever you want to call it. I make things from wood. Tables, chairs, cupboards, chests. Sometimes a cradle. Sometimes a coffin. From the beginning to the end, you might say. Everything from wood." He told me about his workshop, an old farmhouse on the edge of a village so small it hasn't even a shop, just a church, a well, and his place. The workshop is in the barn, he said, a large room with high ceilings and a window facing south, through which the sun comes when it shines, which in the Black Forest isn't often. But when it does, the light falls on the workbench and on the timbers leaning against the walls, and then they glow. The walnut almost black, the oak golden brown, the cherry reddish, the spruce pale as honey. Each wood has its own color, he said, its own grain, its own character. No two boards are alike, never. In 50 years, I've never found a board that matches another. He told me how he works. Slowly, he said, always slowly. You can't rush wood. You must feel it. You must understand it. Every piece of wood has a story. Where the tree stood, how old it was, whether it grew in wind or shelter, whether it had sun or shade. All of that is written in the wood, in the growth rings, in the grain, in the way it bends and how it breaks. When I get a new piece of wood, he said, I look at it first, a whole day sometimes. I run my hands over it, feel the grain, the edges, the cracks. I smell it. Every wood smells differently. Oak smells bitter and earthy. Cherry smells sweet. Stone pine smells of mountains, of high, cold, clear mountains. And then, only then, when I've understood the wood, then I begin to work. He told me about a table he'd made, from an old walnut that stood in his village's churchyard and that had fallen in a storm. 200 years old, he said. 200 years that tree had stood in the churchyard, watching people come and go. Generations. Christenings and burials, weddings and farewells, all beneath that tree. And when it fell, they asked if I could make something from it, and I made a table. A large, heavy table at which a whole family can sit. And sometimes, when I run my hand over the top, I feel the years. 200 years stored in the grain, like memories the wood has never forgotten. Wood tells stories, he said. That's what I've learned in 50 years. Every branch, every knot, every scar is a story. Here a woodpecker pecked. Here ivy wrapped itself around the trunk. Here lightning struck, and the tree carried on, grew around the wound, enclosed it, made it part of its story. And that, he said, that's what's most beautiful about wood. It doesn't hide its wounds. It shows them. It makes them into patterns, into grain, into something beautiful. A knot in wood isn't a flaw. It's a chapter. Outside it grew dark, and the train drove deeper into the forest. The firs stood so densely that through the window you could barely see the sky. Only trunks and branches and needles that briefly glowed in the train's light, then disappeared again into darkness. The carpenter's eyes were half closed, and I could see his hands resting on his knees, those great, strong hands that had touched so many trees and read so many stories. Hands that knew how 200 years felt, how patience felt, how wood feels when it's ready to become something new. He got off at a small station that smelled of resin and wet wood, put on his hat, nodded to me, and walked into the darkness of the forest as though he were part of it. And perhaps he was. Wood tells stories. I think of that when I'm tired and the world's spinning too fast. Then I imagine his workshop, the light falling through the south window, the smell of wood and sawdust, the silence broken only by sanding. Shh, 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 slow and steady as breathing. The train carries on through the dark forest, and the rattle of the wheels sounds like wood being sanded, gentle, rhythmic, patient, and my eyes grow heavy, and I sink deeper into the warmth, into the silence, into the scent of stone pine and walnut, and the stories the wood tells whisper to me softly, ever softer, ever gentler, until they become part of my dreams. It's one of those spring evenings, one of those magical evenings when the world feels new, when anything seems possible. The train heading from Baden-Baden to Rastatt, a short line, a familiar one, and the air through the window smells of petals and damp earth, of rain that's just fallen, heavy, sweet rain, of life ready to come
wanting to break through, wanting to grow. The rattle of the wheels, ta-dum, ta-dum, has brought me an old memory today, a memory 30 years old, perhaps more, perhaps less, time makes no difference. A day long ago on this very line, when I saw a winter garden, a marvel of glass and love, and in it sat a woman, an old woman, so very still, so motionless, that I thought at first she might be a statue, a plaster figure, not living, not real, just painted, just remembered, just a vision the train was showing me. I was younger then, much younger, with less sorrow, less understanding, less knowledge of the world and its suffering, and I got off in Rastatt, a small station, a small town, a place I never visited again, and I went to see this woman, a friend of a friend, someone I didn't know, someone I'd never have met except in that moment, in that particular moment, in that winter garden, on that railway line, on this earth. She sat in a winter garden, that strange, wondrous place, that room living between outside and inside, between garden and house, between nature and culture, between wild and tamed, between warm and cold, between life and shelter. The glass was cold beneath my fingers, thin, crystalline, transparent as a soul, and outside it was winter, January, gray, icy, hostile to life, destructive, a season of cold and darkness. But here inside, in this tiny space, in this precious glass house, in this warm shelter, plants were growing, living, almost flourishing, as though the season didn't matter, as though the cold couldn't penetrate. Not wild plants, no, tamed plants, domesticated plants, plants brought in deliberately from outside, lovingly, so they wouldn't die, so they could survive, could stay green while the world beyond was white and dead and silent. She was already old then, I'd say 70 or older, perhaps 80, perhaps 90, I couldn't say, and it didn't matter. Old in a way that isn't measured in years, but in losses, in grief, in the weight of a lived life. Her eyes were gray like winter light, like the light from ice, like moonlight, like candlelight fading, pale, soft, sorrowful, but beautiful. Her hands were thin, so very thin, like bird bones, delicate as paper, like old silk, fragile as something that might break soon, that breaks easily, but didn't want to break, but held on, but lived, but tried to keep living. "Welcome to the winter garden," she said quietly, without moving, without really looking at me, as though I wasn't there, as though I were a ghost. "This is the only place where I can still be, can still exist, can still bear it. My heart is too weak for the real garden, for real nature outside. The flowers out there are too wild, too loud, too demanding, too much life, too much energy, too much to ask, too much beauty, too much pain. They require, they demand that you notice them, that you tend to them, that you love them, that you give time, that you give strength. But here in this winter garden, they can live, can grow, can almost flourish, and I can watch them, can observe them without being overwhelmed, without falling apart, without giving up my remaining life, without surrendering my whole heart." I asked, carefully, slowly, how long she'd been sitting in the winter garden, whether this small world had become her entire life, this little, warm, safe room between the seasons, between inside and outside, between living and being sheltered. 10 years, she said, and her voice was like falling leaves, heavy, tired, like water drying up, like water running out, like something coming to an end. 10 long years since my husband died, since he left this world. He was a gardener, a real gardener, not someone who gardens as a hobby, not someone who plants flowers as a pastime, but someone whose whole heart was in the earth, whose hands were always dirty, always brown, always full of life, whose entire soul was made of growth. I was never like him, never like him. I was always too weak, too delicate, too fragile, too small for the real world. But he loved it intensely, working in the garden, digging, planting, growing, creating. And I loved watching him, his hands in the earth, his face in the sun, his happiness, his fulfillment, his sense of purpose. Seeing that was enough for me. Now he's gone, he's died, and the wildflowers outside terrify me. They're too grand, too demanding, too wild, too merciless, too uncontrollable, too real. But these plants here, these gentle plants here. She gestured to an ivy climbing softly up the glass walls, slowly, carefully, to jasmine, to small, delicate roses, to things living indoors, things tamed, things safe. These plants remind me that life hasn't ended, that something still grows, even if I myself don't grow, even if I stand still, even if I fade, even if the world is meaningless without my husband, that life is still possible in this winter garden, that life still happens around me, green and gentle and real. She stood up very slowly, with great effort, as though working against gravity, against time, against her own body's weakness. She led me round like a museum, like a sacred place, like a shrine. "That's a clematis," she said of a vine bearing violet flowers, flowers that shouldn't be violet, not in January. "My husband planted it 15 years ago, before he fell ill. It's outlived him. It's lived 10 years in this winter garden, and look, it blooms still, even here in artificial light, in this artificial warmth, in this glass prison I call a garden. Everything wants to live. Even the things that have been forgotten want to live, want to bloom, want to have color." She showed me a notebook, a thick, worn notebook full of entries. "Every day I write down what these plants do," she said, "how much water I give them, when the sun comes in, when the temperature drops. I talk to them. I tell them about my husband. I tell them about my children who don't visit anymore because they don't understand why I sit here, why I grow old here, why I can't escape this winter garden. I say to the plants, your grandfather was here and he loved gardens and he'd be proud of you." And the plants listen. They don't understand the words, but they understand the meaning. They take my love and give me life in return. And now, on this spring day, this springtime line, on this journey from Baden-Baden to Rastatt, I pass by again, and I think of that winter garden, that sacred space. And I don't know if the woman still lives. Probably not. 30 years have passed, a whole lifetime, and she was already old, already weary, already fragile. Whether the winter garden still exists, whether it's been destroyed or abandoned or forgotten, whether the family tore it down, whether the plants died, whether the clematis still blooms without witness, whether the ivy still climbs the glass walls, whether someone else sits there now in that precious, protected room, in that place between seasons. But I know, with absolute certainty, that she lived, that she understood something many don't, that sometimes life doesn't have to be loud, doesn't have to be wild, doesn't have to be glorious in the traditional way, doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes life is simply a winter garden, a small room, a place between two worlds, a space of glass and love, where an old man's dead flowers still bloom, still live, still grow, and an old woman sits and watches, observes, patiently, lovingly, and speaks to them, silently, and loves them, and is loved by them, quietly and gently. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything needed. That is enough for a whole life. And the train carries on, further through the seasons, and spring blossoms rush past outside the window, golden and eternal, and I fall asleep, slowly, safely, peacefully, grateful for all the winter gardens of the world where life continues quietly, beautifully, without witness, except for someone who knows how to look, really look, who knows how to wait with patience, who knows how to love without words, without demands, without hope for return, but simply from the depths from the depths of what it means to be human, what it means to love someone who's gone, what it means to love a plant, what it means to stay when everything says you should go. And the train carries me, carries us all, home. On the line from Goslar to Bad Harzburg on an autumn afternoon. One of those days when the leaves were orange and red, crimson gold, like fire that doesn't burn but breathes, that needs no energy but offers life. I found myself across from a man who simply looked, simply watched, simply was. Not stared, you understand. That's quite different. But looked with intention, with focus, with genuine affection, as though he were reading the entire landscape like a book, like a scholar with his most treasured volume. As though each tree, each plant, each blade of grass was whispering something to him, sharing a truth, revealing a secret. He was tall and thin, almost fragile, with hair the color of moss itself, that soft gray you see on ancient stones, delicate and fine. And his eyes were brown, concentrated, sharp like a hunter's, but not hostile, rather loving, admiring. In his pockets I could see little containers, tiny plastic cases, all clean and carefully labeled with handwritten names I couldn't quite read, Latin names, scientific names, words from another world entirely. I asked what he was carrying in those boxes, what this ritual meant, what purpose all that organization served. His face lit up, not dramatically, mind you, more the way a lamp gradually brightens, the way sunlight breaks through clouds. Mosses, he said, and suddenly he was alive, present, genuinely happy. I'm a bryologist. That's a moss scholar, someone who studies these tiny, extraordinary things most people simply walk past without seeing. I collect mosses from the Harz, not for sale or commercial reasons, but for study. I catalog the species, I understand their ecology, I learn their secrets, the secrets of this living world hidden in these small green things. I confess I thought it might be rather dry, academic, dull. But when he spoke, his entire voice, his whole being transformed, as though he were talking about love, about art, about music, about something sacred. Mosses are the oldest plants in the forest, he said, and his eyes shone like water, like something luminous. The oldest surviving life, older than trees, older than flowers, older than time itself nearly. They care nothing for seasons. They're always green, always active, always alive, summer or winter. No pause, no hibernation, just living. They don't trouble themselves with fashion or money or fame, these modern obsessions that torment people, ideas that mean nothing to moss, that are entirely beside the point. They grow everywhere, where it's dark, where it's damp, where the world is too shadowed for other things, too wet, too unwelcoming, too difficult. And yet, or perhaps because of it, they are extraordinarily beautiful, truly beautiful, remarkably wise, remarkably important, remarkably sacred. If you look at moss under magnification, if you really look, if you take your time, you see architecture. You see beauty that's been hidden deliberately, concealed on purpose, visible only to those who look closely, who understand that you must wait, must observe, must have patience. He pulled a small magnifying glass from his pocket. Not some cheap thing, but something maintained with great care, old but precious, and showed me a tiny moss specimen from one of his containers. "Look here," he said, his voice growing quieter, more intent. "This strand is no longer than a human hair, even shorter, thinner, more fragile. But in this thread is an entire life. It knows how to drink water, how to store water, how to find light even in darkness. It knows how to reproduce, not like flowers with bees, but with spores, with release,
with trust in chance and air. It has a strategy for survival, a blueprint, a way of being that's hundreds of millions of years old, and it's so small that thousands of people walk right over it without noticing, without knowing they've stepped across a universe, across a wonder, across proof that life is everywhere, that beauty is everywhere, if you simply look. I asked how long he'd been studying mosses, whether this was the work of his life, his passion, his obsession. 40 years, he said, and the number held no pride, only humility, acknowledgement. Since I was 17, I wanted to be a botanist originally, a great botanist, someone who'd become famous, write books, show the world how wonderful plants are. But then I came to the hearts, with my father, who collected too, other things, stones, minerals. And I saw a moss, and that was it for me, utterly lost. There are 1,000 moss species in the hearts, perhaps more, perhaps 10,000. I'm still not finished with my catalog. I probably never will be. But that's all right. The point isn't finishing, it's collecting, learning, understanding. Every autumn I travel this route, this sacred route, from Goslar to Bad Harzburg, and I step off and I gather mosses, mosses everywhere. The Harz has the most beautiful mosses in Germany, perhaps in all Europe, perhaps the world. I'm an expert, I know. The dampness, the mist, this wonderful moisture, this holy wetness. The way the light, when it comes at all, filters through the trees, breaks, glows. Everything is perfect for mosses. Everything's optimized for them. Everything's made for them. It's rather like a moss paradise up there, high in those mountains, where the misty cold embraces the trees, wraps them tenderly, where the moisture speaks to the air, whispers, sings. My whole life, 40 years, my entire heart, my whole soul is invested in these tiny green things, devoted to them. His gaze grew distant, dreamy, content, satisfied, complete. I'm not married, I've no children, at least not in the conventional sense. People, my family, they think it's sad, a tragedy, an unfulfilled life, a life of lack. But my mosses are like children, my family, my life's work. I come to truly know them, really know them. Their nature, their distribution, their lives. I give them names. Each one has an entry in my catalog, my life's work. I care for them. I protect them where they grow. I show them respect and love and attention. A whole lifetime of attention. The train accelerated gently through the autumn Harz landscape, and I could see the trees, yellow and red, glowing like fire that's golden and beautiful rather than destructive. And beneath them, in the dampness, in the wetness, invisible to most eyes, only to those who know how to look, mosses were growing. Thousands of species, millions of plants, all small, so very small, all strong, stronger than they appear, all patient, all wonderful, all sacred. I've learned, the bryologist said softly, his voice dropping lower, growing older, deeper, speaking almost like a blessing, like an old priest, like someone who understands the world's secret. That life doesn't always have to be large, doesn't have to be loud, doesn't have to be visible, doesn't have to be famous, doesn't have to be important the way people measure importance. The most important things in the world are invisible. Mosses, fungi, the mycelium beneath our feet, the underground network, the root work that connects everything, that carries everything. They make the whole world possible. Without mosses and fungi, there'd be no earth, no plants, no animals, no people. And we scarcely notice them. And that's all right. That's more than all right. That's their secret. That's their beauty. That's their holiness. And as the train rolled on, steadily through the autumn colors, the hues rushed past, orange, red, gold, and the sun sank behind the Harz, disappeared, surrendered, gave way to night. I grew weary, not with physical tiredness, but with wonder, deep wonder. for these invisible things living all around me, present everywhere, tiny, patient, unremarked, yet essential, yet sacred, yet marvelous, yet beautiful. And I fell asleep like moss itself, quiet, damp, deeply rooted in the night's darkness, with the holy certainty that I am part of something vast, that I carry and am carried, that I'm small but matter, that beauty is everywhere if you have the time, the patience, the love to look.